Alright, going to do a mushroom trip report. I'll be reading from notes, so if you see my eyes darting all across the place, it's because I'm sort of mucking around on the computer, checking all my shit. So I'm going to add a bit of a disclaimer here, just because, yep, mushrooms are illegal, and they're pretty scary. Okay. However, I feel that you should be able to explore your own consciousness. It seems a bit silly that the government tells you what you can and can't do with your own body. Right, so also I feel that you should trip in a safe environment. If you can, have friends around that know you're tripping and can look after you if you sort of start to freak out and bring you back to reality. Should be prepared, definitely. Make sure your environment's clean, all that good shit. So, I'm making this video mainly so I can sort of keep a record for myself and so I can share it with my closest friends. Obviously I'm not going to be uploading this to YouTube publicly, but obviously I'll be putting it on there privately. Right, so some of the events were really fucking jumbled. Sometimes I can't really remember what order they go in. Some of them, the events were quite crazy and amazing. Some are really fucking freaky and terrifying, and some are really eye-opening. And there was a few embarrassing moments there too. I don't think it'd be right if I left out those embarrassing moments just to save face for my own integrity. So, as I mentioned before, trip in a safe environment. First mistake I made. I was in an unfamiliar environment. I was at my mate's holiday house. Although I tripped balls and saw some cool shit, I also saw some really scary shit. It was definitely the most amazing experience in my life, hands down. You got to take the good with the bad. Look, reality is really fucking awesome, but there's nothing quite like having a serious fucking mushroom trip. There's nothing really in the mortal world that compares. Look, so you probably won't understand what the fuck I'm talking about a lot of the times unless you've tripped yourself. So I'll try to explain it, rather. Excuse me. The best that I can. About a week after I had this trip, I did the John Hopkins Bad Mushroom Trip Survey, which you can Google, and even if you haven't tripped, have a look at some of the questions. You get a bit of an idea of some of the things you could experience. So, I mean, I kind of use the questions as a template to help me remember how the trip went. So, just scrolling down. So here's the story. Alright, so me and my buddies were all sort of amateur rock climbers, so we decided to go on our sort of first climbing trip away from our suburbia where we live, our little town. We left at about 6 in the evening, and we had about a 2.5 hour drive, maybe 3. Can't quite remember. I'm a bit of a dummy. So we got to his place at about 8 in the evening. This was kind of my first mistake because by the time I did start tripping, by the time I ate my dose, it was probably about 10:30 at night. So that was probably a bad idea because the trip went for quite a fucking while, probably about 6 hours in total or so. So the first sign of tripping sort of started about 20 minutes after I ate the mushies, and I had about 5 or 6 grams, I'd say. They were pretty much dry, still a little bit fresh, but for the most part, yeah, dry. Right, so we were watching a bunch of rock climbing videos, and there's one particular scene in a video we were watching where this old gentleman was talking about his son who was a free soloer that died after free soloing, I guess. Had a bit of a slip and whatnot, and this guy, he talks with a whistle in his voice, kind of like the pedophile from Family Guy, and it was absolutely hysterical. That was the first sort of sign that I was tripping, you know, just fucking started laughing my ass off at something so silly. I looked around and sort of, you know, everyone was sort of chuckling, but not like me. So I felt like a bit of a dummy, but yeah, anyway. And then shortly thereafter, I started having some open eye visuals, which I've experienced before. Yeah, I was looking down at the carpet on the ground, and if you've ever looked at carpet when you're tripping on mushrooms, it can make some really crazy patterns and things like that. You know, there was shadows warping, and the pattern in the carpet was sort of transforming and breathing. So yeah, anyway, the rock climbing video ended, and I mentioned to my buddy that I'd eaten a small palm size dose of mushrooms, and he seemed to be pretty cool with it. You know, he's kind of interested in that kind of thing as well, even though he hasn't done it. So yeah, anyway, the night was sort of getting a bit late, and we wanted to be up early to go climbing. So you know, as we were getting up, heading off to bed, I looked down at my hands, and I was like, whoa, they started shrinking. My hands and feet had just like shrunken, kind of like looking through a fisheye lens camera. And I'd experienced this before, but in lighter doses. So we all sort of parted ways, and I went to a bedroom, and luckily I had a room to myself with a double bed, so that was good, because if I was fucking sharing, I would have lost my fucking mind, and the person next to me would have been tripping balls in proxy, because they were like, what the fuck's going on with that guy? Anyway, so I headed over to the bedroom, and I kind of felt a little bit tipsy, just like after having a few beers, and I had an extreme urge to pee. It doesn't help that I've got a really weak bladder, so I headed off to the bathroom for a piss, and that's when it really fucking hit me. For some reason, mushrooms don't really like to stay in my stomach, so I sort of started dry heaving a little bit, and I found out the next day my mate sort of heard me go to the bathroom, and sort of, I didn't spew at this point in time, I did a bit later, but yeah, he did hear me dry heaving and whatnot. And I got into the bathroom, and I just started getting these really hot flushes, and I was like, okay, this is getting a bit heavy. I'm starting to really fucking heat up. So I fucking, in my confusion, took all my clothes off except for my undies and just laid on the tiles in the bathroom, just starkers, flat on my back, looking at the ceiling. Closed my eyes, sort of collected myself, and when I did collect myself, I jumped up and just slowly walked back to the bedroom. I made the mistake of sort of thinking the mushies, that was the end of the trip for some silly reason, that, you know, that was going to sort of calm down, but in fact that was just the start of this crazy sort of adventure. So went back to the bedroom, and I laid down in the pitch black, and instantly I was sort of overwhelmed with patterns, and I freaked out a little bit at first. I sort of reached for my phone, which was on the bedside table, and pressed the menu button to sort of illuminate and look around the room, just to sort of collect myself and, you know, get my head back in the game. And I noticed the screen was blurry when I looked at it. It was just sort of ghosting when I looked at the screen. And then I looked at my hand, and I noticed that I had 9 fingers. I don't really have 9 fingers, but it's kind of like going cross-eyed and looking at your hand. You're like, woo, and you see an extra bunch of fingers. It was like that. So personally, I have some pretty crazy sleeping issues. I've had bouts of insomnia before. So one of the things that helps me get to sleep is not listening to music, but listening to people talk, such as podcasts, television, things like that. So being that I was at my mate's holiday house, I didn't really have a TV to sort of take my mind off it and knock me out. So I put on a bit of Joe Rogan Experience podcast to sort of try keep my mind at ease. And this was really frustrating because I didn't know where the light switch in the bedroom was, and I couldn't for the life of me in the dark untangle my fucking headphones because I was tripping balls. They were just, yeah, anyway. So eventually I did unfuck that mess of cables, and I popped the buds in my ears and chilled out for a bit. And this is kind of when the trips sort of got extreme. I was in a cave, but not like a sort of dark and gloomy cave. It had a lot of depth, like it was in high definition 3D, and there was these pillars coming down from the ceiling, and they were twisting and distorting, and it looked like one of those visual trippy backgrounds that you can Google on the internet, kind of like that. I'll show a picture of one that my buddy showed me a while ago, which looks remarkably close. And the pillars had swirls around them of colour and patterns, kind of like a candy cane. And this is when I first sort of went, whoa, what the fuck am I experiencing? This is amazing. And it felt like I forgot to breathe. And this is kind of when the onset of the time dilation effect kind of set in. Everything sort of slowed down. And I was in such amazement from what I was seeing that I swear I was holding my breath for minutes at a time. And yeah, so anyway, going on with that. So I was listening to the Joe Rogan Experience, and it just didn't feel right. It felt distracting and kind of cumbersome on the trip. So I took the headphones out and, you know, put my phone back on the bedside table, and I started hearing voices, and they were telling me to breathe. They were saying, slow down, just breathe, slow down, and they were just repeating over and over. And I noticed that when I adhered to the voices in my head, this is psychotic as that sound, the trips would change. The pillars would expand and contract, and they would alternate colours between blue and green with my breathing cycle. And that was just like, whoa. I was really fucking overwhelmed, but kind of like, alright, I've had enough. I'd be happy to finish this here, but yeah, no, that was just the start. So, yeah, this is also when I noticed that when I started having those negative thoughts that I wanted the trip to end, the trips would get dark, and the pillars would turn into this honeycomb textured pattern with depth of tones of dark grey, and it just felt scary. And immediately I remember just saying to myself in my head, alright, you tripping, it's cool, just be at ease, come back, be happy. And when I did this, the colours, it reverted back to that experience that I was explaining before, where I had that the pillars and the colours and the swirling and the breathing and contracting. Great, I'm getting a message. So I could control my state at that point in time, more so my mood, if anything, but I was definitely on a ride. And at this point in time, I also noticed that my senses were starting to get confused. I was quite uncomfortable in the bed, and I noticed I started tossing and turning. Every time I sort of kicked the sheets, I would sort of twitch, and the patterns would change like they were linked to my senses. And the more I sort of tossed and turned, the more intense they got, the more they warped. So that was pretty crazy. And where was I? So I was saying, alright, that was definitely the most intense part of the trip for sure. So as I mentioned before, I took the headphones out, so I was sitting in silence, and there must have been something in the room that was creating that static buzzing sort of noise you hear when, you know, you've got a bit of equipment like a radio or something like that turned off. Sometimes they just make that zzz noise, that kind of thing. And I'm not sure if that's what it was, but I started hearing trance music, and I think it might have been that buzzing noise amplified on balls, just like going completely nuts. I was hearing like zzz, oof, 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 duh, 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 duh. And then the sounds kind of got a bit more distinct and started turning into just this really crazy trance song. And with each sort of sound, the different sounds were creating different distortions in the trip. Like the sort of low pitched buzzing noise would create trembling, and then the doofed-in, the ooft ooft ooft, would, you know, create these pulses, bump 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 bump, and the pillars would expand and contract really fast. That was fucking cool as shit. For some reason I heard Joe Rogan's voice in the back of my head as well. No idea what he was saying to me. Yeah, it was just, yeah, whatever. Yeah, right, so due to the time dilation, I started getting a bit uncomfortable. I was getting paranoid that this was going to drag on, and I would be exhausted for the next day of rock climbing tomorrow. We were getting up reasonably early, so I didn't want to be fucking exhausted and climb up the side of a cliff face and not having my sort of head screwed on straight after having an intense mushroom trip. So I really wanted the trip to end. I wanted to go to bed. I wanted to be fresh for the morning. And that, the feeling of this changing my outlook on what was going on, wanting it to end and being scared that I wasn't going to get back to sleep, I wasn't going to be good for the morning, that really sent me on a bad path. And I believe that's what kicked off the negative spin of the trip. So, I reached over for my phone to check the time, and I remember I couldn't see. I was feeling around with my hand, and as I was feeling around, my fingertips, as I touched things, were creating visuals in my head, like it was affecting the patterns, the geometric patterns I was seeing. I wasn't feeling in the normal sense with your fingertips that you can touch a wall and know that there's something physically there. I was feeling by seeing in my trips, and it sounds ridiculous to explain, but yeah, I'm sure some people that have tripped before can sort of understand this, but that was trippy as all fuck. And that's when I noticed that I couldn't see for the life of me. Even after I was trying to turn my phone on and illuminate the room, I was waving my hand in front of my face, and all I saw was patterns. It's like my eyes had completely shut down, and I was just tripping, and that's all I could see. So, due to the fact that I couldn't see shit, I was really confused. I wasn't sure what was going on, so I kept touching my face to make sure that I was sort of still connected, I was still there. And because, as I mentioned before, my senses seem to be equal now to visual trips, so I couldn't really feel things. I had to really I remember biting down on my finger really hard. I didn't sort of feel myself touching my face. All I could sense was resistance, and I couldn't tell if my eyes were open or closed, so I kept on touching my eyelids and touching my eyeballs. I remember I had no feeling whatsoever. If I was to touch my eyes now, it would hurt. I remember touching my eye and going, oh, this is interesting. I'm completely numb to sense, and when I do touch things, it is equal to visual trips. As I mentioned before, I've got a weak bladder, and in the John Hopkins study, one of the questions is urge to urinate, which I answered 5, which is extreme. I must have gotten up 5 or 6 times to pee, constantly going back and forth to the toilet, trampling around, making noise. I was kind of worried that I was going to wake people up, so I would go outside to pee. And being that it was quite dark and I was unfamiliar with where I was, my senses were completely fucked up. I was tripping over things, and it was a complete mess. I remember flopping out my dick to have a pee, and nothing coming out. I could feel my bladder going, come on, let's do this, come on, hurry up. But just nothing was coming out. Went back inside, tripped balls, and then I was like, alright, I need to pee again. This is when things started getting really confusing, because I could visually see inside my mind, the trips had subsided, the visual hallucinations, rather the geometric patterns and whatnot had subsided, and I was now having out-of-body sort of experiences. I would get up out of bed and walk to the bathroom, and I was there, and I would go through the motions of doing things, but I was still in bed. It was so real, I felt I was there. The only thing that kept me connected to the fact that I was still in bed was that I could now feel myself laying there still, and that was kind of scary, and I experienced it a few times, which I think I cover later in my notes. So when that happened, that really freaked me out, because I felt like I'd lost control of my body, and I really wanted the trip to end. And I was so confused that every time I wanted to do something, like physically get up, my mind would get up and wander around, but I could still feel myself in bed. It was extremely difficult for me to get a sense of whether or not I was laying in bed tripping, or if I was actually walking around. So that really freaked the fuck out of me. So I got up. I eventually figured out that I was still laying down, and I became aware of how to control my body, how to get up and move around, even though I was tripping, how to tell what was real and what wasn't real. As I mentioned, I was freaking out, so I got up and I went outside again, and I fucking stumbled into the side of the fridge, and I heard my mates sort of like roll around in the next room. So I got up and I went outside, and I really wanted to vomit. And I was in my mate's backyard, and I was gagging, I was making a lot of noise, I was overheated, and I took my clothes off for some reason, wandered back inside, jumped back in bed, and I threw the clothes in the corner. And I remember that when I went outside, I was like kneeling down in the dirt, kind of like trying to hold myself up, trying to like vomit. And at this point in time, I was just really just bent over, like gagging and whatnot. I was on my hands and knees. So when I did come inside and throw my clothes on the ground, I thought that they were covered in dirt, and I thought I was covered in dirt. And I remember in the morning I did check my clothes, and there was like not a speck of dirt on me, except for like these tiny little patches on the knees, and those little fucking prickly things that stick to your clothes. So I jumped back in bed and I started tripping balls again, and I started astro traveling again. I was really confused. And I remember I was walking around in the holiday house, and I wasn't actually walking around. I was still laying in bed. I could still feel myself laying down. And this is when I realised that I could sort of travel through memories. I could put myself in different scenarios. For instance, I was kind of like, alright, I want reality back. I want to get back to the real world. I want to go to yoga. I want to go rock climbing. And when I thought of these things, I saw them. I was at yoga, not physically, but my mind was there, in first person, going through the motions. The studio was, the yoga studio that is, was full detail. It wasn't just, you know, when you sort of have a memory, you close your eyes and you're like, oh yeah, I remember, yeah, my car's black, it's got a steering wheel, it's fucking got wheels, blah 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 blah. This was as if I was really looking at it, as if I was there. Again, I could sense myself still laying down in bed, so I knew I wasn't there. I remember tripping and seeing myself rock climbing in the first person again, and I remember saying, I really want to go rock climbing, I want this trip to end, I want to be back in reality. So I was trying to snap myself out of it, and yeah, it obviously didn't work because I was still under a heavy fucking dose. So I had that urge to pee again, and I really wanted to go outside. Felt like I had a good few hours of tripping and some really kind of awkward moments as well, but I really wanted it to end. So I got my clothes, and I remember that when I frantically pulled them up and threw them off me, the sleeves were inside out, and I couldn't figure out how to put them on. I couldn't untangle the mess. Eventually, must have been 5 minutes it took me to get ready in the pitch black. As I mentioned before, I could not see anything because of the darkness. Even when I turned on my phone, it was really hard to see. The patterns were overwhelming my ability to see. So when I did get up and get my clothes on, and I used my phone to sort of to light up where I was going and whatnot, to get myself back outside, and I was walking around tripping over things, not falling on the ground, but sort of bumping into things. And this is when I sort of felt that I needed help, so I texted a good buddy of mine, and I was like, dude, I am tripping balls, I'm freaking out. And initially he was kind of like, haha, it's all good, mate. And then I said, no, man, I'm freaking the fuck out, I'm scared. And he just sort of calmed me. He sent me a few messages, calmed me down, and said, just go with it, you're gonna be alright. You know, where are you safe? Do you need me to come to you? And I remember I was 3-4 hours away from him, so by the time, if he did drive down there in the middle of the night, it must have been like 2 or 3 a.m. It would have been too late anyway, and it doesn't really matter because yeah, the trip was going to end in a few hours anyway. When I was looking at my phone, it was extremely difficult to navigate the menu. I was seeing things in the menu, like I would see that I had a new message alert, but I didn't. When I was writing messages, the words were all jumbled up, and sometimes I inserted words that made no sense, but I was still able to go and error correct the messages before sending them to him. and he's actually got still got the messages saved on his iPhone, so I'm going to ask him to send them to me, and I'll probably insert them into this video or save them on file somewhere, because even as embarrassing as fuck as they were, I think it's still an important part of the trip. So anyway, let me sort of catch up to where I was in my notes. So I was getting really paranoid. I kept hearing noises and feeling like, someone was behind me, lurking in the shadows, and the silhouette of the trees cast on the ground was really scaring me. It was like a horror movie. I was seeing myself in third person, sort of kneeling over, and I tried to fucking vomit again, and this time I stuck my fingers down my throat because I just wanted to get the mushrooms out of my system that bad. But I was making a hell of a lot of noise, gagging and whatnot, so I wanted to spare the embarrassment. I didn't want my mates to wake up and come outside and see me hunched over, tripping balls, trying to vomit my guts up. So I went for a walk, and I walked out his back fence and walked over to an empty lot, an empty block of land behind his house, which had a few large trees there. I kind of hid behind one, and every time I saw a set of headlights drive past, kind of like cowered in the corner, and I remember curling up in a ball with my hoodie on, trying to keep warm. It was quite cold that night, and I was just bent over, trying to vomit. I was trying to get him out of my system. And I remember earlier in the trip, this is where I said that my memories were a bit jumbled, that I felt like I was stuck in the trip forever. I thought to myself, this is it, I'm stuck. I'm going to be tripping balls forever. I saw a vision of myself in a padded room, laying there, as real as the other visions I'd had earlier. And I thought that I was just off to the hospital and that was it. This is when I saw a vision of my dad, just sort of standing there, walking around. He didn't say anything, but I could sense that he was there to look after me. He was, for my whole life, he's always provided for me, helped me out. And I just remember that I could count on him no matter how bad it got, and if I did get stuck on the trip, he would look after me. And then I also had a vision of my gorgeous little niece. She's 1.5 years old. Yeah, she's beautiful, and I remember seeing through my own eyes, looking down and seeing her. And whenever I visit her, she always puts her arms up for a cuddle, and this is what I saw. And I just had this overwhelming sense of absolute love for this kid. I'm not sure if I felt that I needed the trip to end. I needed to get back to reality. That's why I saw these two images, so I could be with my father, who I've actually connected with a lot more since tripping. He doesn't know about the trip, but I've been working at his factory for free just so I can see him more, so I can help him out. He's a busy guy. So anyway, back to the story. So those two trips only really lasted a short period of time, seeing those visions I had. I sort of walked back into my mate's courtyard in his backyard, and I went back to the garden. I tried to fucking vomit, and when I was vomiting, I would stick my fingers in the back of my throat, trying to induce it. When I was doing this, it was like I had a camera attached to the tip of my fingers. I could see through that camera down the back of my throat, as if I was going to see a doctor, where they get those fucking snake cameras and hot down the hatch, and you can see. That's what it felt like. That's what I could see, as as clear as day, as real as any of the other visuals, the other visions I'd seen. And I do remember when I was breathing earlier as well, laying in bed on my back, that I could see inside my chest cavity, my lungs expanding and contracting, and my heart, beating. Anyway, so I was trying to induce vomiting, and little bits of vomit would come out, and just, as I mentioned before, I was completely numb to sense, so I could not feel my fingers down my throat. I could see them down my throat. When I vomited, I remember feeling the slime all over my hands and keeping my fingers in my throat, trying to get as much out. And I'm not sure if the vomit that did come out is what stopped the trip, or if I was just at the end of the trip anyway. I do remember seeing visions of me curled up in the fetal position in bed in the morning, and it was from third person perspective, and all the people that were on the rock climbing trip with me were standing around my bed, but in particular my really good mate, who's probably going to be the only person that I will share this video with. I just remember feeling such negativity, not towards him, but in my actions, as if I'd betrayed him, I'd let him down. He'd invited me to his holiday house, he drove, and he'd done all these great things for me, and here I am fucking tripping balls and vomiting all over his backyard. And I just felt so fucking sorry for him, and luckily he didn't hear me throughout the night. I did talk to him about the experience the next morning. Yeah, and he was cool with it. He gave me some warm words. He said, man, if you're freaking out, you should have just woken me up. I would have come and sat with you. We would have just chilled, man. It would have been alright. And as I said, I just felt, completely like I'd taken advantage of him and I'd betrayed him. And I felt an overwhelming sense that he would never trust me again. And I was really paranoid that that would be the case. So anyway, I was pacing around his backyard through the garden, and at this point in time, I looked at my phone and I realised that the trip was subsiding. It was coming to an end. And the time on my phone coincidentally was 4:20 AM. If you're a stoner, obviously, you know what that means. And it felt like the trip ended quite abruptly. And it felt like at this point in time, I was just hungover. And it felt like maybe the start of the trip where there was still visual distortions, open eye hallucinations and whatnot. But compared to fucking the experience I just had, both the amazing and the terrifying, that was nothing, just having a few open eye visual trips and whatnot. So at this point in time, I was able to get up and walk over to my bed and go back to sleep, and I fucking fell asleep like that. And 3 hours later we woke up and we started getting ready for the rock climbing, the full day of rock climbing. Yeah, so it was pretty intense, and I'm kind of telling this story because I feel like it needs to be told for my own reasons, as I mentioned before. Excuse me. And a friend off Hash Drugs on 42010 told me I should do this for my own benefit. And I feel like I had to include the bad part of the trip, which I actually didn't tell my mate about all the details. I left out a lot of the embarrassing moments, like vomiting all over myself and feeling like I was covered in dirt, and all the awkward text messages that I sent to my friend, who, as I mentioned, was an experienced psychonaut. So I left out a lot of the embarrassing, scary details when I did tell him. And also, it took a little while for me to recollect what had happened, and the John Hopkins survey helped me remember as well. So in the morning I was quite scattered and I couldn't really remember everything. It sort of came to me over the next, couple of days, week, and I did talk with my buddy about it in somewhat detail when we were driving home, as much as I could remember. I didn't tell him about the fact that I thought it was going to destroy our friendship, and it hasn't thus far, and hopefully he still trusts me enough to invite me down to his holiday house and over to his place, to chill out and smoke some dope and all that good stuff. So yeah, that's it, the end.